Do not let her run!
Please, whatever I have done, tell me. I will fix it.
This is what you deserve. You think your skin makes you better than us?
I have never said that. Never!
That is where the story begins. But to understand it, we must go back. Adaze was born at noon, not at dawn, not at dusk, exactly at noon when the sun sat above the village of Umuchi like a king on a throne. From her very first day, her skin was lighter than any woman born in Umuchi before her, the color of fresh shea butter, of morning light touching river water. Her parents were quiet, steady people, a groundnut farmer and a mason, not rich, but good. Adaze also carried something they told no one about, a gift. When she pressed her hands against a wound, the bleeding slowed faster than it should. When she sat beside a sick person, fevers dropped by morning. When she ground herbs, they worked stronger in her hands than in anyone else's. In a village like Umuchi, a gift like that could become a burden if the wrong people heard about it first. Umuchi was small, and small villages have long eyes. The trouble started small, the way all great troubles do. By the time Adaze was 12, the village had built a story about her without her permission. They said she acted like her skin made her special, that she walked with her chin too high, that her fair skin was a sign of pride. None of it was true. Adaze greeted elders before they greeted her. She fetched water before sunrise. She wore plain wrappers. She kept to herself. But the story had already been written. Ngozi had always wanted to be called the finest woman in Umuchi. Chisom feared any man who saw Adaze would stop seeing her. Mama Ebele had whispered poison into people's ears for so long she had forgotten she was doing it. They were not evil. They were women who had grown up being compared, ranked, overlooked. And when they saw a girl who received attention she never asked for, something old and wounded in them rose up, something that could not separate its own pain from another person's existence. So the cruelty began. They spoiled her name at the market. They pushed to the front at the stream until she waited alone at the back. They moved her food pot from the serving table to the ground at community gatherings. On the road, they did not greet her. In the market, they made no space. At celebrations, they stood in rows and turned their backs. The same women who said Adaze was proud were the same women who had never, not once, spoken a kind word to her face. Adaze bore all of it. She tightened something deep inside herself the way a woman ties her wrapper before hard work, and she kept going. She was not looking for attention. She was looking for peace. Just peace. It never came. It was a Tuesday, market day in Obogo. The paths were quiet. Adaze had stayed behind to care for her feverish mother. She cooked, sat by her mother's bed until she slept, then stepped outside with pots for the stream. She was on the narrow path when she heard footsteps. Ngozi, Chisom, Mama Ebele. They had not gone to market. They had waited. Ngozi carried the clay pot the way a person carries something prepared in advance, smiling, not a happy smile, a smile that had been sharpened. Chisom moved to cut off one side. Mama Ebele planted herself on the other. There was nowhere to go. The water hit her before she could raise her arm. Thick, dark, the rotting smell of a pit latrine on a hot afternoon. It spread across her shoulders, ran down her back, soaked through her dress. Now you match your inside, Ngozi said. They left. Adaze stood in the middle of the path, liquid dripping from her elbows into the red dust. She picked up her pots, walked to the stream, washed her body, her hair, her dress, sat on the bank until the sun dried her. Then she cried. Not angry tears, not bitter ones, just the kind that come when a person has parried too much for too long and something finally says, enough. I have done nothing, she said to the water. I was only born. The river moved quietly past her, but something in the forest behind the stream shifted. A branch moved where there was no wind, and at the edge of the trees, an old woman appeared. She was ancient in the way all the Roko trees are ancient. Her wrapper was the blue-black of deep water. Her white hair was wrapped in cloth so old it had no color left. Her back was straight. Her eyes had seen everything and were no longer surprised by any of it. She sat beside Adazi on the bank without asking. I am someone who was also hated once for things that were not my fault. I have been watching you for a long time. Adazi said nothing. The old woman reached into her wrapper and brought out a small gourd sealed with dark beeswax. She placed it in her hands. It was warm, which made no sense for water. This is water from the source, from where the river begins before it has touched anything human. When you are ready to leave Umuchi, not to run, but because you have decided, open this and drink. Then pour what remains at the entrance of this village. What will it do? Adazi asked. What needs to be done? The old woman simply said. And then she was gone. Not walking away. Gone, the way morning mist disappears when sunlight finally breaks through the trees. Adaze walked home and hid the gourd at the bottom of her mother's medicine box. She was not ready, but she was waiting for something. She could feel it.
Word of Adaize's healing hands had been spreading quietly. Farmers from Obogu asked about her. Desperate mothers brought sick children to her gates at night. A man with a wound in his leg that had refused to close for 4 months. An elder whose joints had stopped letting him reach his own farm. Adaize helped them all, without announcing herself, without asking for payment. Then Chisom went to the village council and planted a story. She used the word that could finish a woman in Umuchi completely. Ogu, dark medicine. She described the healings as unnatural, too fast, too clean. 2 councilmen listened. Adaize was summoned to the village square. She stood before the seated elders in the open air, the whole village watching. She wore a plain yellow wrapper. Her hands were folded. Her face was still. They read the accusation. Bring me the people I have healed, she said. Let them speak. Or let anyone here who is sick come forward. I will walk in front of all of you, in daylight, with nothing in my hands but my hands. A small boy pushed through from the back of the crowd and stood before her. A sore on his shin had been weeping for 6 days. Adaize knelt. She pressed both palms gently around the sore without touching it. She closed her eyes. She breathed slowly. After several minutes, she stepped back. The closest elder leaned forward, squinted, stood from his chair. The sore had closed. The square erupted, and then all eyes turned to Chisom. Chisom's lie was unraveled in front of every person in Omuchi, slowly, completely, every thread pulled out and held up to the light. The eldest elder spoke. There is no darkness here. What this child carries is a gift. We have been wrong to let fear twist it into something else. That night, Adaize took the gourd from her mother's medicine box and held it in the dark of the kitchen, the fire low beside her. She thought about leaving, that particular exhaustion that comes not from hard work, but from existing somewhere that does not want you. She thought about the boy's closed sore, about Ngozi's daughter she had healed through the night, about her mother asleep in the next room with her groundnut-stained hands. She thought about the old woman's words, not to run, but because you have decided. She was decided. She broke the beeswax seal. The smell that rose out was unlike anything she could name, like the first rain after a long dry season striking hot earth for the first time. She drank. Warmth moved through her from her throat to the ends of her fingers and settled behind her eyes like sunrise.
She walked out of her compound through the sleeping village, past the mango tree in the square, past the narrow path where the water had once poured over her head, and stood at the village entrance. She poured what remained into the red dust. Then she walked home and went to sleep. Nobody saw it happen. Nobody was watching the right things. Ngozi woke 3 days later to find her skin had broken out overnight in spreading patches, dark and ashy, moving from her neck down across her arms. She scrubbed, she oiled, nothing changed. Within a week, the patches had thickened into something the nurse in Obogu had never seen before. Ngozi, who had mocked Adaize for the skin she was born in, now stood in her own skin and felt what it was to be looked at and found different. She sat in her compound one evening and put her face in her hands. Chisom's punishment came differently and more publicly. Every time she arranged a lie and opened her lips to deliver it, no sound came out. Only truth could leave her mouth. For a woman who had built her reputation on quiet, poisonous additions and careful omissions, this was devastating. Within weeks, Chisom had been forced by her own tongue to confirm 3 things she had spent years denying, including the full story of how she had crafted the accusation against Adaize, which came out in the market in front of 12 women, her hands shaking as the words walked out of her mouth unassisted. Mama Ebele's punishment was the quietest and the most complete. People simply stopped coming, one by one, without announcement. The younger women who had deferred to her found their own voices. The councilmen held meetings without sending her word. She was made invisible in exactly the way she had made Adaize invisible, daily, without ceremony. She sat outside her hut one evening in the silence of a village that had moved around her, and she understood. Adaize was packed before sunrise. 1 trunk, her mother's Bible, a small mortar, 3 wrappers. "Come with me," she said to her mother in the dark kitchen. Mama Eda shook her head. "This is my place, but your place is bigger than this village ever understood." Adaize pressed her forehead against her mother and stood like that for a moment, the fire between them low, the guava trees outside beginning to show their shapes in the early grey. She walked out into a quiet umuchi, red dust, dew-dampened, soft under her feet. She stopped at the village entrance and turned to look back one final time. Not with anger, not with triumph, with grief folded together the way only honest feelings ever are. She turned and walked onto the road. By the time Adaize reached Obogu, the story of the healer from Umuchi had arrived before her. Within a year, she was training at the state hospital. Within 3 years, she had been recognized by the Ministry of Health. She built a small healing center on the edge of Obogu and planted a garden of herbs around it. She took no money from those who had known. She wrote to her mother every week. Years later, a small girl was brought to her clinic, about 9 years old, fair-skinned, quiet, being bullied in her village, refusing to go to school. Adaize knelt to her height. What they see when they look at you frightens them, not because you are bad, but because you are different, and they have not yet learned that different is not dangerous. "Will it stop?" the girl asked. Adaize thought of a path between 2 huts, of dark water falling, of red dust at a village entrance, of a river moving quietly past a girl asking what she had done. "Yes," she said, "and when it does, you will discover that everything they made you carry was building something in you, something they could not have given you if they tried." "What?" the girl asked. Adaize smiled, that same small private smile she had carried since the morning she walked out of Umuchi. "Yourself," she said. "It builds you into yourself." Outside, the afternoon sun fell across the herb garden in long golden strips. The leaves moved in a small wind. Everything smelled green and alive. And Adaize stood up and returned to her work.